You're listening to a podcast from thespoilist.com. Welcome to First Contact. Remember, this is what you voted for. I'm Andrew.
I'm James.
And I'm Alex.
This time we are talking about The Perfect Mate. It had a teleplay by Gary Perconte and Michael Pillar, a story by Rennie Echevarria and Gary Perconte, and it was directed by Cliff Bowl. This first aired the 27th of April 1992. James, what happens in this one?
The Enterprise is transporting a Kriosian ambassador and his cargo to negotiate peace with their distant relatives, the Valtians. But before they can get there, they have to answer a distress call from a Ferengi shuttle to remind viewers that they exist before Deep Space Nine premieres next season. Their accident was a ruse, and they were really interested in the precious cargo, a woman. It is revealed Kamala is a metamorph, who empathically senses what men around her want and becomes their perfect partner. She's been promised to the Valtian ambassador, and her personality will become fixed as she reaches sexual maturity. Following an accident, the ambassador is seriously injured, leaving Picard to carry out negotiations. But he must work closely with Kamala to learn the traditions and rituals vital to the negotiation. But can he resist her charms? If only Troi was around to help with all this empath stuff.
Alex, you'd never seen this one before. What do you make of it?
Well, an episode where we're seeing someone brought on board the ship who can sense each of the crew members' individual desires and tailor themselves towards that, and an examination of the ramifications therein. I very much enjoyed the Red Dwarf episode Camille.
Yeah. Camille, which of course aired in early 1991.
It was Valentine's Day, wasn't it?
It was Valentine's Day, the perfect Valentine's Day episode. This aired in April 1992. We suggest nothing.
Good Lord, that is surprising. You really would expect that Red Dwarf would be ripping off liberally Star Trek The Next Generation.
I think the only example I can think of where there was enough distance where you could throw that accusation is probably the simulants being the Borg.
Yeah, but the Borg are the Cybermen anyway, so there's not...
Yeah, but in terms of look, they're very Borg. We've had the episode Thanks for the Memory. That was done on TNG, but they aired practically around the same time. Or certainly within a year of each other. And this, again, TNG is a year after Camille. And then we've got, effectively, a Gunman of the Apocalypse ripoff, which is around the same time.
And Patrick Stewart has the gall to say he was on the phone to his lawyers.
A definitely true story.
That's quite remarkable. I mean, I find it very difficult to believe that... Well, I don't know. Is it difficult to believe that someone around the production was watching Red Dwarf? Probably at this time, yes. But, I don't know. It's a different landscape today to watch, albeit a popular at the time British sitcom in America, then to what it is now. It would have been a lot harder at the time. Although, was it being shown on PBS at the time, or did that follow later? I honestly, I can't remember at what point.
I mean, it would have been around the time they were starting talks for the US Red Dwarf, so there must have been awareness over there of it.
Well, anyway, we can't judge it based on that, except I think this episode could really have done with a lot more Casablanca references. So you have this very Star Trek The Next Generation setup. You have the two peoples with the same origins who have been at war, but they're going to do a negotiation. There's some cargo. Oh, there's a distress call. Apparently the second distress call they've answered in recent times. And, it's the Ferengi. Were you pleased to see them in it again?
Did this by any chance fall around the time of Deep Space Nine gearing up?
They would have been like in early stages of production, so they probably knew at this point that they were going to have a Ferengi in the cast.
Yeah, it feels like that.
Obviously, we're reaching the end of this season very slowly, but we're reaching the end of this season. So, yeah, in a few months' time, in a real world perspective, Deep Space Nine would be arriving. So yeah, they would be in pre-production at this point, I would imagine. And
because just in terms of TNG, it's been, or well, it feels like it's been quite a long time since they popped up. But the fact that they are obviously on the brink at this point of popping up somewhere else does just sort of feel somewhat intentional, because there's no reason that it needs to be them here. They sort of very quickly fulfill their purpose, and then pretty much it.
And it's not the only Ferengi episode around this time in TNG. Right. There is another one where basically it could be another alien, but it's just them to remind the audience.
It's also very important to master the makeup and make sure you're doing it right before you have to do it every single week.
Yeah.
And interesting you mention mastering the makeup, because Kamala's makeup ends up being used for Dax in Deep Space Nine.
There is Deep Space Nine in the air, because as you'll remember from the host, the Troi makeup was very different previously. But that's fine. First appearance weirdness. I mean, I think the Ferengi, as you say, they're pretty much there as a driver of the plot to make the thing happen, but they are painfully annoying. It's not like you've said, oh, we're going to make them regulars on a show. Let's add a bit of nuance. It is very much exactly the same as what you would have got in season 1 or 2 of The Next Generation. They're just very poorly drawn characters and clearly the bad guys, and just nothing redeeming or that interesting about them.
And constantly trying to pull the episode into a broader comedy than it is elsewhere. I mean, that's not to say that it isn't being played for laughs elsewhere, but that element of it is dragging it into a much broader region.
But again, even in Deep Space Nine, that is what they're like. There's not really another dimension to them, aside from the odd character here and there, like Rom and Nog.
I always thought when Deep Space Nine was on, if I'm doing a rewatch, it's always like, oh, it's a Ferengi episode. Because I think Quark is a good character, I think Rom is a very good character, and good actors. Obviously, the Max Grodenchik who plays Rom throughout Deep Space Nine is one of the Ferengi in this episode. But I do think they're not my favourite part of Star Trek, despite there being some good characters and an overall interesting story. But it was always, oh, we're doing Ferengi stuff. Similarly, I guess, when it's Next Generation and they're doing a Klingon episode, my heart always tends to sink a little bit. But I know I'm in a minority there.
Are you telling me that you don't like the episode where Quark has a sex change operation to make money off women's clothes?
I am telling you that is that's definitely on the skip list. But I guess talking about tropes that were maybe best left in the past, do you think this is a sort of valid story point? It's basically people trafficking, it's sexual slavery, and obviously Star Trek's a good place to talk about this sort of thing. And you have Crusher, who is making the argument, well, this isn't acceptable, this isn't good enough, and you have the kind of prime directive, arranged marriage conversation. This is all well and good in some cultures, but I don't know, is it just uncomfortable for Star Trek to touch? Is there any way that an early 90s show can do this kind of story justice?
Well, I think it's worth saying that it does feel like recently we have been really working through all of the issues, haven't we? I mean, maybe it just feels that way, but it does feel that, you know, we've had ritualistic suicide, Alzheimer's, the increase of age and needing to settle down. And yeah, this week we're on to, well, there's elements of slavery in there with the idea of the gifts and arranged marriages and whatnot. If they keep burning through issues at this rate, very quickly we're going to end up with an episode where, I don't know, Picard has to sit Geordi down and talk about how he's not particularly on board with the way that he keeps parking the Enterprise in the bay for accessibility needs.
Have you skipped ahead to season 7?
It's no worse place to address it than anywhere else, I suppose. I mean, we've had elements of dealing with the idea of arranged marriage before. I think perhaps the element that makes this more uncomfortable is the heightened sexualized nature of it.
And that's very Star Trek, isn't it? It feels straight out of the motion picture with Ilea, and I guess there's elements of that in Troi as well.
At times it works. Don't get me wrong. Like there's an interesting element at one point with dealing with the male gaze, with all of the crew in the bar, and you're sort of, the way it's presented is sort of suddenly showing it from her view of everyone sort of closing in upon her. So that's kind of an interesting element to it, but it doesn't really go any further with it past there.
It raises points that I don't think it could ever kind of resolve.
But fair play to the episode and the writers in some ways for at least giving a voice to some of the aspects of it. It's not made in a silo where this is just a male sexual fantasy. Obviously, it is written by men, and there is elements of, oh, you want a woman who will completely mold her personality around you and have very little agency and always bow down to your needs. That the very idea is in some ways offensive.
I guess there is also that slightly, you could call it an uncharitable reading, but you could sort of read it from the sense of Picard is the only guy because, yeah, I'm not like the other guys. I have spent my time while the rest of you have been partying, I've been studying the katana in my room privately. An uncharitable read, yes, but you could still read it that way if you wanted to, and I'm sure there will be people that perhaps may want to.
Obviously I think this is fairly heteronormative in its presentation, but the idea where they say you'll need a chaperone, that there's one man who won't be affected, and you just think, or a woman? Just a straight woman, maybe? What? It doesn't have to be Data. You actually have people who apparently will not be affected by her pheromones.
Maybe that's why it needed to be Data. Although he is fully functional.
Well, exactly. And as we know from that episode, he's also prone to viruses and stuff like that. So, hey, who's to say? Again, like you say, I think the presentation of it is not terrible. And I think the character, the way it's played, does have some agency. And I guess the actual point of the episode, the actual exploration, is about Picard and him having a relationship, and that he puts duty before his own feelings.
Picard is definitely in the celibate society. I mean, all the way through, she wants to go through with it. The episode is challenging not just the characters, but the audience as well, in that she has her own agency, but she's using that to go down a route which we don't want her to, really. But that's where the episode has a difficulty resolving the plot.
I mean, I guess running through it, you have, in the first case, the human erection, Riker. And, we can say he's made some questionable choices in the past, but here, when a woman is very much trying to seduce him, and he resists, perhaps surprisingly, due to the situation, due to duty, due to his maturity, or I'm not quite sure. It's like, I would have thought the contrast would be the approach of Riker and Picard, but he's been professional here.
It was very strange that we suddenly had all these skeezy guys in 10 Forward that just would never be there in any other episode.
Yeah, well, that was in the captain's log at the start, wasn't it? That they had rescued some miners. They'd been delayed, or something like that, wasn't it? Like, so there were skeezy guys on the Enterprise.
I mean, I had to look on Memory Alpha because I was thinking, why are there suddenly these horrible misogynistic men in 10 Forward?
That's just William Riker. He's always there.
Yeah, I guess to talk a bit about Riker. I mean, he resists the charms of Kamala, despite
Just
her
about.
wanting to play his trombone. Is he professional here? Is this just to sort of show her allure, or what is the point of this scene with Riker, where she tries to seduce him and fails a little bit?
I guess just to show the. Oh God, it sounds terrible wording it this way. To show the danger of it. But I mean, that's what it is. But it feels very TOS, doesn't it?
I mean, I guess so. I mean, a lot of it does.
Come and teach us these ways you call kissing.
Yeah, and it's just bad, because obviously you have this fully grown woman, and there's sort of this idea that she's not reached sexual maturity yet. She's not molded herself to a man yet, and it's just a little bit uncomfortable. Like, not as uncomfortable as, say, Kez in Star Trek Voyager is, but still, there's this sort of like there's an implication of childlikeness or naivety, but also she's, a seductress. There's just so many elements of it which you're just icky, for want of a better word.
I think that's one of the areas where Red Dwarf's take on it actually, as much as I'm not criticising this episode actually particularly. I found this more watchable than a lot of other ones that we've watched. But I think one of the things that worked in Red Dwarf's version of this favour a bit more is the fact that it's not just adapting some personality. Well, I was going to say adapt some personality. She does a little bit here, but it's mostly just pheromones. It seems to vary a bit, whereas in Red Dwarf it is a full adaptation. They each see someone that looks completely different, and acts completely different, and actually, as such, that becomes a bit more of a character study in a way, which is a silly thing to say when you literally have one character that sees themselves, because obviously that's the joke. But it becomes a little more insightful into things than this is able to as a result.
The idea is that Kamala will imprint on a specific person, but that takes time, and that's why you can't have a man with her for too long. And because she's with Picard for so long, she imprints on him.
I think you're right. I think from a sort of purely performance point of view, it doesn't seem that extreme. There does seem to be very much, you get an idea of her sense of self, who she is. Even with the Riker scenes, you don't get the impression that she's... What elements of Riker or Riker's perfect partner would you get there? Would it be more interesting if she'd mirrored a Vulcan or something like that? Something where you can actually get that. And I mean, the closest you get is the skeezy guys in 10 Forward, where it's like, yeah, I'll have a beer. And it's just like the most basic version of what this could be.
Oh, but yeah, you have Worf as well. She growls at him, doesn't she?
Yeah, she growls at him. Obviously, it's very difficult, especially what we're suggesting here is just like, we'd like her to lose even more agency to make it the character make more sense. And it's I don't think it's an idea that's not worth doing, and I don't think they completely blunder it in any way. I just think it's probably just a little shallow, if anything. And if you want to say the heart of the episode is Picard faced with a relationship that could jeopardize a mission, a negotiation, a peace, and potentially a partner that could make him happy, is it sort of part of that plot arc of a captain must be lonely?
Yes, sort of. I mean, if you were going further down that route, normally you would have him actually be conflicted at some point. But apart from a casual business meeting breakfast, he doesn't have a huge amount of conflict. You never feel that he's about to resign his commission, for example.
No, it doesn't really seem like an object to him. It's obviously he will have a cold shower perhaps and say, please stop this, but it doesn't feel like his captaincy is ever in question. It's not like Riker in The Outcast, which felt like a much bigger deal, and it felt like it could potentially jeopardise his career. This just feels a bit like he is tempted and he is impressed, but it's also Picard isn't going to do that. Not TV show Picard. He is just like too sure of himself. He is too much sure of what is right and wrong and what the truth of a situation should be to ever do that. And I don't think they could have pushed that further, but again, I don't know. But like, I think there's nice chemistry, although a large age gap between the two performances. I think they work quite well. You can kind of see, okay, yeah, maybe this could be the sort of woman that Picard settles down with in some way. But yeah, I don't think there is, like you say, there's no chance he's going to lose the Enterprise or anything like that, or do anything foolish, because he's just not a foolish man.
I don't think it's possible to have a cold shower on the Enterprise, is it? Because they have sonic showers.
I don't know. Troi has a big bath in one of those episodes, though, doesn't she? Maybe Genesis.
The showers are sonic, but the baths are water. I mean, they do have water on the Enterprise because they've got dolphins, as we'll find out soon.
I mean, that was this episode, wasn't it? He suggested to the Ferengi, no? You want to see the dolphins?
Oh God, yes, he did. That's an actual thing.
Yeah, there are dolphins on the Enterprise. They're apparently used for navigation.
Cetacean ops.
Right, yeah.
Do you think it's a little bit strange that in an episode all about an empath, that this is one that Troi isn't in?
I mean, everybody needs time off.
On the Troi note, yes, it is odd to see her so absent. I suppose Crusher sort of makes sense here in terms of those two characters have a history, but that's not really brought up, as I say, as a result. And maybe it's not the quality of the chat, maybe it's the croissants, but I did, feel a bit more sort of morning business meeting rather than informal chat between friends. Beverly, I'm terribly conflicted. Well, Jean-Luc, I think you need to do what you need to do. Very well. Now let's have a look at the B2B numbers.
She got very angry at him at one point. She told him off.
She's very much there to be the voice of women.
The one woman.
Yeah. She's there to say that prostitution and sex trafficking is wrong, and everyone else is going to go, oh, Beverly, must you be such a stick in the mud about these things?
Well, I mean, if we think back to Half a Life, and I know we keep referring back to this, but that was such a well-written episode, and if we think about the way that tackled the Prime Directive by having it be an outsider who has to have the ethical crisis with it, whereas here it's Picard having the crisis with the Prime Directive, but that can never really work. I mean, maybe if there's a life at stake, like in season 1 when Wesley fell into some flowers, but yeah, you know he's never really going to do anything to jeopardize the mission.
No, I think actually with the Outcast, that was one of the things that worked better in terms of stakes with that episode, because Riker is a more believable character for someone that's just, going to fuck up. Picard is quite infallible, which, it's not an issue necessarily. That's your character, but it lowers the stakes a little bit as a result.
And I guess in terms of the stakes, the secondary plot, the non-character plot, the peace negotiations between the two boring ambassadors,
always the height of drama.
There's not a lot to it. It feels you have the sort of classic old man ambassador type. Oh, but he's hidden something. But they don't seem that bothered that he has actually tried to do some people smuggling using the Enterprise.
Yes, that's an uncomfortable element, isn't it?
That's fine.
Oh, we hid her in this container because you wouldn't understand Yeah, well, yeah, you're damn right I wouldn't. You essentially strapped her into a barrel.
Can I also just come back to, and I'll come back to this in the next episode as well. I don't understand the lack of security on the Enterprise. A hostile race that's come on board. Well, we'll trust you'll just stay in your quarters, and we won't post guards or any codes on any of the doors or anything. Feel free to wander around wherever. And I get that's maybe the idea of this utopian future, but it also is just like, no, it can't possibly be this stupid.
Yes, a completely unmanned cargo bay which has something of import in it does feel something of an oversight for the flagship.
I did think back to, I think it was the Drumhead, where they were criticising the security on the Enterprise. It was a gross dereliction of duty from Worf.
I don't think he really knows what his job is.
And he was tracking the Ferengi because he knew that they went into that cargo bay eventually.
Right, and I would say the point to deal with that is before they get into the cargo bay. Maybe press a button up there and make sure the door is double bolted. I don't know. It does feel a little bit, okay, this is happening for plot reasons, which is fine.
Not to blow our load early, but you might want to feel slightly differently when I tell you that the Nitpicker's Guide does pick up on that and says, after the Ferengi come aboard, one of them simply waltzes into the cargo bay, apparently without resistance. Why didn't Picard station a guard outside the cargo bay, or at the very least lock the door?
I mean, yeah, like, I don't want to be in Nitpicker's Guide territory, but
But, I mean, for once, fair.
Yeah, got a point. Absolutely got a point. But I guess the consequence of that is our character, who ultimately does imprint on Picard and becomes this swashbuckler archaeologist type, but who likes books and independence, is then forced to marry a very boring man who is not really that interested in the first place. It's just part of a ceremonial agreement, and that's, I guess, the tragedy of it.
I guess that's the question. Is she forced, or is it her choice? Is she forced by circumstances to make the choice?
And if you've been conditioned all your life to have that sense, can you ever really argue that her choice is really hers? And that's quite a classic Star Trek kind of question in a lot of ways.
And deep questions that the episode does not have the scope or the time frame to really answer.
There were apparently 4 proposed endings to this, and there was lots of arguments. The writer took their name off it. It's a pen name, the only pen name in Michael Pillar's tenure on The Next Generation. It's Gary Perconte, which is a great name, is a pseudonym for Michael Pillar's friend Ruben Leder, who didn't like the rewrites. And so there was an ending where basically she said she rejects both men and she just leaves, which is probably, for that character, the best ending. There was a sort of dream sequence where Picard interrupts the ceremony and wants her to go away, and then it's just, which like would be completely out of format for Star Trek Next Generation. We don't really get to see inside people's heads like in Scrubs, but yeah, ultimately they went with the ending where she carries out her duty. It's fine.
It's probably the best ending to go with of all they had. I think it's best to leave the audience to ponder the questions that it raises rather than give a kind of any definitive ending.
I do feel like there's just this problem of a woman in a man's world forced to do the things that one man made her who she is and another doesn't really want her. Well, bye now.
Yes, it's a terrible quandary. Still, must be getting on.
And that's pretty much it. It's not a hateful episode. It's not a badly written episode, but it's a, I would say overall, somewhat unsatisfying episode in many ways.
I think it does suffer coming after episodes like The Outcast, because the ending of The Outcast was much more affecting and darker, actually, as well. And you're not going to be able to necessarily do the same kind of ending with this episode, but that also couldn't resolve what it was bringing up, but did it in such a way that was quite narratively satisfying that you don't get the same thing here, and as such, because it comes not that far after that episode, it suffers in comparison. Were it not in the same sort of region of that episode, I think you'd probably look at this one a little more favourably.
Anyway, we're going to talk about a few behind-the-scenes bits and pieces in a place we call Quickfire.
Quickfire.
This is Famke Janssen's second acting appearance. She would, of course, go on to play Jean Grey in the X-Men films, opposite Patrick Stewart as Professor X. And curiously enough, she refers to herself in this episode as a mutant. What are the chances of that?
There is a bit of like an X-Men kind of pre-reunion, because you've got Professor X, you've got Jean Grey, you've got Cyclops.
Oh, wow. Excellent work. The Perfect Mate was filmed between Friday the 14th of February and Thursday the 25th of February. So, a year to the day after Camille aired. Oh, my suspicions grow.
It takes quite the coincidence to create the same episode, more or less, with incredibly similar main character names.
Yeah, there's that as well.
During production, the cast and crew celebrated Surfer Pants Day. The wearer of the most unique pair of baggy surfer pants was awarded with a prize.
Dolphins are revealed to be on board the Enterprise. It was first mentioned in yesterday's Enterprise that there was a cetacean ops. Star Trek Lower Decks has made dolphins and cetacean ops very much part of the show. And of course, if anyone's ever seen Sequest DSV, you'll know that a lead dolphin character is a great idea. Rick Berman said, fulfilling his role, "I'm very pleased with it. Famke Janssen is about as beautiful as any woman any of us have ever seen, and she gave a delightful performance."
This episode builds upon references previously made in prior episodes by finally revealing to us the nature of Picard and Crusher's morning tea. Great. I think we were all dying to see the intricacies of that one and the baked goods that were available.
Famke Janssen, she got it within 2 days of auditioning, and she said it didn't have a great time to prepare. New script pages were delivered on a daily basis, which she found difficult. She was not fluent in English at the time, which, like, genuinely, very good performance, if that is indeed the case.
Where is she natively from?
She is Dutch. I mean, like, her accent and everything is pretty extraordinary.
Yeah, it's very good.
Yeah.
Who knew?
Presumably the casting director.
This episode very much echoes the original series episode, written and directed by John Meredith Lucas. Fun fact, that is the first and only episode of Star Trek written and directed by one person until Star Trek Picard Season 3 when Terry Montalis did it. Anyway, it's very like the episode Elan of Troyes from the third season of the original series. Well, thank you once again for listening. We will be back soon talking about Imaginary Friend. We do hope you'll join us for that one. But until then, goodbye.
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 Do you think that on the Enterprise they have to put an out of office on?
Yeah, I would imagine so. It feels like that sort of workspace. They all use Microsoft Teams.
See, my problem with Teams at the moment is whenever I put try to put my out of office on Teams. It just doesn't go through. It works on Outlook, but it doesn't work on Teams. I hope they've resolved that by the 24th century.
Probably not. None of these apps ever talk to each other.